rebuilding America together. This is the Jeff Santos Show.
34 minutes past the hour on this rainy Tuesday afternoon. We go from a place where it rains quite a bit in the Northeast to a place where it rains quite a bit in the Northwest. And that's, of course, the great city of Seattle, where we find our regular contributor, of course, one of the best freelance journalists in America, a great musician in his own right, and a regular right here on the Jeff Santos Show. Our good friend Mark Taylor-Canfield joins us. Happy Tuesday. Happy Solstice Day, and we welcome you to the broadcast. Mr. Mark, how are you, sir?
I do want to give a shout-out to all the teachers listening today on Teacher Tuesday. And I wanted to let you know that the weather report here has gone down from 64 degrees on Christmas Eve to only in the upper 40s. If you want snow here, if you want a white Christmas, you're probably going to have to go up to Snoqualmie Summit or Alpental, the ski resort, because snow in Seattle is about as rare as finding a really good New York-style pizza here. You know, we got the good
I don't think that's going to be likely a find in Seattle. For some reason, the water on the West Coast just doesn't get it. So,
well, there is
all about the water.
There is one place here who does what I would call a real New York pizza pie, which is there's a big difference between a pizza and a pizza pie. A pizza pie is thick and has a lot of filling. It's not a piece of bread with a little bit of cheese on it. Anyway, that's not an important news story, but that's part of it.
All right. Hey, we're 3 days before Christmas, and it's going to be a fun day. Look, you mentioned education, and that to me is a vital piece of the topics in the Badass Teachers Interview. But in education in Washington State, even though we're talking about one of the more progressive states in the country, it has this different funding mechanism, and it's irritating a lot of people. Talk to me about that, Mr. Mark.
So each school district has to raise money within the district in order to keep the schools going. In poor districts, that's really difficult, where people don't pay a lot of property taxes. But there's a big standoff in the state legislature between the Republicans and the Democrats on this, and the editorial staff of the Seattle Times, the state legislature, for claiming that they're making plans to fund education. Meanwhile, the Seattle Times is saying that's time for the planning stages. A $3.5 billion deficit per biennium as far as education, public education in Washington State. And so they've got to find this money. The state Supreme Court has found the state legislature in contempt of court for violating the state constitution, for not adequately funding public education. And yet the governor and the state legislature have still not acted. And it's a big political battle. The Republicans actually have a majority in the state Senate, and they are have been gaining more seats in the House. But they don't like any kind of property tax increases. There is no state income tax in Washington State. And the Democrats are upset because the Republicans' plan would disproportionately tax the, more liberal, progressive-leaning Seattle and Bellevue taxpayers. So at least the Democrats from the city are against that. So you have the standoff in the state legislature. The Seattle Times, at least since August, has been just hitting them over the head with these editorials saying, you've got to act. And actually, Jeff, I just don't understand why a lot of the local media and, real journalists in this area are not pushing on this issue too, because as far as the public interest, what could be more in the public interest than educating our children? So, it's politics, and it's also the way that the Washington State funding system is set up for education. It's actually it's faulty. It's never been adequate. There's always been shortfalls, and it's been considered unconstitutional. The way that the state raises money for public education through these school district levies, even the state's superintendent of public instruction in Washington State has said that it's unconstitutional, and so has the state Supreme Court. So it's also a constitutional crisis, because the way that we're funding things here is violating our own state constitution, and yet the governor nor the legislature seem to be able to come up with an adequate plan to cover the shortfall. So ongoing story, really frustrating for people who support education, and especially, like you said, in a progressive, well-educated area like the Pacific Northwest and the Puget Sound area, you would think that they would solve this problem, but unfortunately, that's what happens with politics sometimes. It becomes a battle a battle between the two parties instead of our supposed, statesmen and women stepping up to support the children in the state, which is what the editorial board is saying right now.
No doubt, no doubt. Talking with Mark Taylor-Canfield here on the Jeff Santos Show. Well, let me get into this a little bit with you in terms of Governor Inslee. Now, this is a guy who was a congressman for a number of years, understands Washington, understands what other states do. Is he leading, or as the Republicans like to say, is he leading from behind? Not Republicans in Washington State, but those in D.C. What is the temperature in terms of what Inslee can do? And he's got a microphone like any governor does.
Well, that's the question that the Seattle Times editorial staff is asking: is why hasn't the governor stepped up, used his beleaguered pulpit, become a major spokesperson on this issue? This is just an editorial comment, but the impression that one is left by the governor's office is that, one, they don't know what to do. They apparently don't have a good plan. And number two, a lot of it has to do with a power struggle within the state legislature. But what's surprising about that is the governor and the state legislative leadership did meet in Seattle a couple of months ago on this issue, and they decided not to call a special session, which is what the state Supreme Court was recommending. Meanwhile, they're being fined $100,000 a day, and that fine has been accruing for months now. And the state legislature and the governor are saying, well, since we haven't passed any state law to handle this money, then in effect they're sort of ignoring the state Supreme Court on this issue. It's really surprising that they would take that stance. But the Republican leadership and the governor got together and met on all this, and the Democrats in the legislature, and that's what they came up with was, well, we'll deal with it later. And we're not concerned about these $100,000 fines occurring every day because the state Supreme Court has designated that money to go eventually to funding education. So to them, it's like, well, we're just putting money in the bank for future education funding. Meanwhile, they don't have a plan on even how to use that money. So no wonder there's been rolling teacher strikes in Washington State over the last year or so, Jeff. And, a lot of contract negotiations broke down this year, too. So there were several school districts where the year started late because the teachers were just saying, this is ridiculous. The salaries are low. The funding is low. The class sizes are huge in Washington State. We have some of the largest public school class sizes in the country. So that's a poor indication of, individualized education in Washington State. And, when you have the superintendent of public instruction saying that it's unconstitutional, you would think that the legislature and the governor would move, but they're not. They're just having more meetings, talking about planning more meetings, I guess. We'll see.
Yeah, planning more meetings. Well, we'll talk about this when we get back from the break, but it just seems to me that there are politicians that, unlike Senator Sanders and others, that are not willing to take on the establishment, whether it's their own party or whether they're concerned about the Republicans. And I want to get back. I want to talk about you always have mentioned the fact that the young people that are moving into Seattle for the tech jobs and so forth, so similar to here in the Cambridge-Boston area, if they are going to be voting, are they voting for a more progressive Democratic Party, or are they voting just for somebody who gives tax breaks to Microsoft and company? Get Mark Taylor-Canfield's thoughts on that and more after this time out. You're tuned in to the Jeff Santos Show.